So, Jay, welcome to THN's Road to Fright Fest. We're here talking about Sick Puppy, which is getting its world premiere at
World
Fright
premiere.
Fest. How are you feeling about the selection and the screening?
Well, I'm like super happy because FrightFest was on the like top of my list when we were applying to festivals. So when I found out quite like soon after we submitted that I was really pleased and really excited and also super nervous because I know like it's a really intense event. There's a lot of films to see in like 5 days, so it's really something. But the idea of having our world premiere outside of our home country is really kind of fun.
Yeah. And, London, Leicester Square is where
Yeah.
all the big premieres happen over here. So, must be quite nice, to be able to now add, your film alongside, some of those other films that have screened at the cinemas.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really like I know the whole team was excited when we found out, and I know Brett and Rachel are excited to go, so we're gonna have a good time there. And I think it's all of our first time in London, so
Nice. And for those that haven't done the homework, how have you been pitching Sick Puppy to people?
I try to pitch it multiple different ways. So one way was like Henry, a portrait of a serial killer, but with a love story, and it's kind of a mix. So it's a little bit of a mix of like on the surface, it's kind of got this B movie feel to it, like a midnight movie, but it's got a lot of deeper themes. And so, what I always try to pitch them is it's basically focuses on the wife of a serial killer and sort of sidelines the actual serial killer just a bit. He's still in there, but I know traditional films kind of follow the serial killer all the time, and it's great. I mean, I love serial killer films. I think, as a true crime, uh, person, I would definitely say it's fun to kind of follow like a Dexter or something like that.
Yeah.
But I prefer. I've seen that so much that I really wanted to do something a little bit different. And the idea of like creating a character who was kind of uh, almost not worse than him, but just as bad as him in some ways, appealed to me greatly because it's unexpected. You start off and you get this idea about this woman who's living with this serial killer, very violent, brutal serial killer, and who has a lot of issues with women. And you're like, how's this working? How this is like she must be some sort of victim. And then as you get to go through the film, you understand it's far more complicated than that.
And like I say, the film focuses on serial killers and relationship woes. How did that idea pop into your head? Where you just sat there watching true crime one day going, I wonder what the wife thought of this.
Yeah, actually, in a way, it was. I mean, the I guess if you want to say the kernel of the idea started back when I was a teenager. Actually, there was a notorious couple serial killers that were mentioned in the other interview that I saw, but I will not mention their name just not to give them extra press. But you can Google it. The idea came their crimes. They were notorious Canadian serial killers, and they killed as a couple. And their crimes like happened when I was in high school, just beginning high school, and the trial was a really big deal. And then eventually, it kind of died off for a little bit, and I found out. So I grew up in Montreal, and on the South Shore of Montreal, and the wife eventually kind of got off in a way. She did a little prison time, but she ended up coming and moving to the South Shore of Montreal uh, shortly after when I was in university there. And the idea of like she just kind of was going to live a normal life. And I know that, she's kind of moved on from that and has a family and stuff. It was very interesting and kind of a little bit like horrifying in a way. And I was always just struck with that. And years went by, and I started watching more serial killer films, because I'm a big horror fan. I'd watched Henry, and I always liked the idea of the focusing on the psychology of the people involved, not just the killer, but like the people that surround them. And the one movie that really struck me was not a horror film. It's like a kind of a suspense, dark comedy almost. If you watch it, the tone is very, very similar to Sick Puppy. Is The Honeymoon Killers? It's a film I think Martin Scorsese did got fired off of. But it was a really interesting film, also about a real life serial killer couple called the Lonely Hearts Killers. And so I'd seen that, and I'd seen Hounds of Love, which is also kind of similar. And I was like, okay, so like, what's the story here? And I kept researching the background, and it just got so complicated. I didn't know whether these women were victims, whether they were willing accomplices. In one case, the killer was like, well, she was, kind of running things. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So it kind of formed from there, and it stuck in my head. Just even the title was originally Serial Killer Girlfriend, and then it kind of morphed into Sick Puppy.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've some of England's most prolific serial killers are couples. We had
Yeah.
like Moira Hindley, and her husband, and Rose and Fred West. So there does seem to be a disquieting pattern of,
Yeah.
people kind of finding, they say that there's somebody for everybody, but it's very disturbing when it's somebody finding somebody that's into that sort of activity it's themselves.
Yeah.
Obviously you mentioned that, John he's quite a brutal, sadistic killer. How did you, kind of go about creating his MO, and his reasons for becoming a killer and the sorts of victims that he was choosing and how he was treating them? Because yeah, it's pretty intense.
Yeah. So for me, the I didn't want to use any of the methods that were used by real life killers. Again, not to create comparisons and like glorify them, but I definitely wanted to go with something like super weird. And I'd seen stuff similar to that in other, movies about, people sort of being treated like dogs. And I'd actually written it in another script or something like that. And I was like, you know what? It kind of works. She's a vet. She's got all this equipment there. It just kind of seemed like it fit. And so once I kind of figured out all the dog stuff, it kind of added a level of horrifying dark humor to it as well. But while still like, you want to have those moments of dark humor, just kind of break up some of it because it would just be a really depressing film otherwise. But you also want to treat every single time like he does something violent, like super seriously. So it was kind of a really tough balance to find, that right level. You want, plus he doesn't really kill that many people in the movie, so you wanted that first instance to be really just horrifying. You want to know that this guy is definitely like, I'm not trying to, make him out to be less of a creep, even though over the film you see different sides to him. I wanted to set him up as just like this, the worst, you know?
And Charlie, sort of the main character, she's such a complex and fascinating character. And it's also important, I think, that she kind of wins the audience over so that they want to kind of go on this kind of dark journey with her. And I guess casting that role must have been pretty difficult. What was it about Natasha that made you realize that, she was the right person for this job?
It was really tough casting this movie. Not necessarily for Brett and Rachel actually, because they were my first picks, kind of. But with some of the other roles, they were a lot tougher to cast to find the right person. I wasn't happy with a lot of people were coming in. They did great jobs, but they didn't really kind of get the tone. And that's a really tough thing to do. I mean, you can't, like, it's a tough tone. But to find somebody who could be like personable, somebody who could just like come across as a likable individual, but also have this nasty side, like we had a lot of people just being like, no, we can't do this, you know? And I didn't know about Natasha. Otherwise, I would have like, auditioned her, or in the end, we didn't end up auditioning her because I saw some of her work, and I was like, yeah, this just after having a chat with her. But I didn't even know about her necessarily because I don't watch the shows that she's on currently. And I was watching for another actress that somebody had recommended, and I saw her, and I was like, "Who's this?" And so I contacted her agent, and so when she sat down, what really sold me is that I saw the script, and it was even in the first interview, it was full of like those highlights and all that sort of thing. And I was like, okay, this is somebody who looks like they want to do their homework. They want to take this seriously. It's just not another job. And when she was on set, she was not only professional, even though we had a really crazy shoot, she was really like always trying to get the best. That was the one thing that I really appreciated. She was always striving. She would, anytime we'd come up with like an idea with like, it's not good enough, like she would try to keep us, making something of quality. And that's something I really appreciated about her. So yeah, it was really that she took it seriously and she's a great actress. So
Mm. And it's right that kind of Brett won the role for a slightly different reason in that he was goofy.
yeah. So every single person who auditioned tried to play it cool, tried to play it like, I don't know why they were trying to play a serial killer cool, but it was kind of weird that it was not the approach. Plus, it's in the script. Like they were saying, like what's on the page, it's all there. So Brett got it immediately when I saw him. He was the only one, the actually the only one, period. And so that's why I wanted to kind of go with him immediately because he was the only one who really got it. And I was just really happy he was able to play that both the darkness and just sort of like this goofiness. Like I think some people have called him like slow or something, but I don't think that. I think it's more like he's just a clueless dude, you know? He's a clueless dude. He can't be dumb because he's actually like gotten away with this for a long time, and some of that's on Charlie because she's kind of the brains of the operation. But in the end, he's quite intelligent, but he's just like angry and frustrated and kind of clueless.
And then obviously also just to touch upon, Rachel is Mia. I mean, that's an equally complicated character because she's a high school girl, but she's trying to seduce a guy who she thinks is a serial killer, but then she's also trying to dominate him. Like that obviously I think, Rachel is still quite young herself. That must be quite a tough role to give somebody like that.
Yeah, I was surprised. I think we sent them three scenes because you kind of need to know where you're going with this if you're going to say yes. So she did all of them, and I was like, that's the character I wrote. Like, even in real life, she's so sweet, but she's got that edge to her as well, and it's great to see her like when I watch her on screen, it's the character I wrote. Like it's exactly like it was like taken out of my head, and it was tough to. I actually I think that a lot of we had a lot of auditions for me. I watched them all, and the it seemed to be like a role that people were gravitating towards because it's not as necessarily controversial as the other two, but it's definitely, pushing some buttons and it's a very complicated role and she just did amazing with it. Could be happier.
And all of the cast have some intense sequences. As a director, how do you kind of go about ensuring that you're fostering that kind of trust and safe space to allow them to give these performances? Because I think without that trust, you don't get, what is in the film.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons it's so intense is because I don't do a lot of takes. I mean, some of it's for practical reasons, obviously. But other also, I'm a firm believer that, I do very little rehearsal. I did a day. I think we even did less than a day. We did like 4 hours of rehearsal just to see where they are with the characters because I like the spontaneity of kind of doing it on set. And so it's always going to be intense environment, so they don't have a lot of time to think about that sort of thing. And as far as the more intense stuff requiring, nudity and violence, we had this amazing stunt and intimacy coordinator who I work very closely with on every single scene that you would see where there's any sort of intimacy or stunt work, which there's a lot of in this one. And she was amazing, and we would talk, we'd figure things out, and we would just like find that space where the actors are comfortable and I'm getting what I need from that so that we can make, the film. And I think that that's really important. I never worked with the intimacy coordinator before. I worked with stunts before, but not in this intimacy. And that was a great experience. I don't think I'd work without one. It's just, it's someone to bounce ideas off of because you never know how things are going to play, right?
Yeah. And I think because I think it's still a relatively new position on film sets. I think for years, obviously, people were, flying without them. But I think that the films that have been made that do utilize them have been better for it because, you have this platform and this person where, the filmmakers can talk to, the cast can talk to, and I think just the fact that there is one on set, I think immediately then makes everybody involved feel a little calmer that they're not going to be maybe coerced into something that they might not necessarily feel comfortable with, which I think unfortunately is something that did happen historically on some projects.
Yes, absolutely. And it's not I I'm comfortable directing those type of scenes, but some of the stuff was like brand new, like that I hadn't done before. And so it was nice to have somebody who had had that experience to bring to that so that I could direct the actors, especially all the stuff with the character of Molly, who's the girl in the cage at the beginning of the movie. And that stuff is like really a lot. And so to have somebody there to kind of support her and to kind of help me figure out the comfort levels and where to, you're able to do a lot more actually with an intimacy coordinator than I would just doing it myself. And I think that's it's an interesting position that I didn't think that was necessarily all needed in the past, but now that I've seen it, up close, I really think it's essential.
And can we just also kind of discuss the music? It kind of flips between like soft rock to chaotic jazz at various points in the film. What was kind of the thought process behind this kind of juxtaposition of sound?
Yeah, so my composer's gonna be really happy that you mentioned the music because he asked us every single time. He's like, "Oh, what did they think about the music?" And it's like, it's the music we worked for a year on. It was we had this very strong idea of what would happen. Each character has a very different theme, and also the film changes as you go on, right? So these people are kind of trapped in their own like sort of weird world. They're like little cocoon at the house, and they're living their own love story. So you see, there's a lot of like love music. There's like the guitars. We wanted to use a lot of like heavy metal sort of guitars, hair metal stuff for Charlie especially. And then so each character we kind of designed the patterns. John, his music's like he has a little bit of a theme when he's killing. It sort of sounds like a lawnmower. You and then the jazz was John listens to a lot of jazz at the beginning of the film, and we wanted this character Mia, who shows up and kind of just blows up the whole movie essentially. We wanted to I felt like the jazz was appropriate for that. So we kind of like it's almost like the music for each character is kind of fighting each other almost in a way. And we by the end we actually combine it for the finale, and we try to bring everything together as much as we can. It was an experimental attempt, and I'm actually quite happy with it. It may not be the most traditional approach to horror, but I think I like it.
Yeah, and like you say, it is that reflection of the characters. So even And I think so often with stuff like lighting or, or score, you can explain exactly what's happening with a character without somebody having to like sit down and have a conversation with another character and say, how are you feeling today? So, it does really work as kind of like a, a silent partner. Well, it's not silent because it's music, but like an invisible partner to each of the characters.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, like we try to combine like I said with the music and then the lighting as well, like just like creating like patterns as much as we could because again, it was a pretty chaotic shoot and all the plans that you have at the beginning kind of just fall apart. But we still try to maintain some of that as we were going through like even in the camera work, we were realized at a certain point we're not able to do a lot of camera movement, but and I had no intention of really using much handheld, and then we ended up doing a lot more of that because of, so we made it into a sort of a pattern, like especially with the violent scenes, we would go a little bit more handheld.
Definitely. And I guess, my final question to you, as you said at the start, Fright Fest is busy. Everyone's trying to pick what they're going to watch when. Why do you hope that they take a chance on Sick Puppy?
Well, I think the film is would be a fun experience for them. I think it would be a different experience. Like there's a lot of great films playing there, and they each have their own like particular category. You got the monster horror, you got the supernatural stuff, and this is not your typical serial killer film. Like from the beginning, you see it kind of like you might be like, oh, is this sort of like a Saw? But it turns into something completely different. And yeah, I think it's just for some people who want to go and have an interesting kind of challenging time at the films, but also enjoy themselves.
Well, thank you so much for your time and best of luck with the screening.
Oh, thank you very much. Take care.